My name is Emily Carter. I'm 28 years old and the middle child of the well-known Carter family from Boston. From as far back as I can remember, I always felt like I didn't quite belong. My parents had a very clear idea of how their children should live, how they should behave, and even what careers they should choose. Somehow, no matter how hard I tried, I never seemed to fit into that perfect picture they had painted for us last month. I passed the bar exam, a huge accomplishment for me. I worked day and night to make that happen, believing deep down that maybe, just maybe, my parents would finally be proud of me. I thought they would see me for who I was and what I had achieved. But I was wrong. Last night, I went back to my family home for a dinner that was supposed to be a happy occasion. The dinner was meant to celebrate my older brother, Daniel, and his engagement to Olivia Parker. I walked in hoping it would be a joyful evening. But the moment I stepped through those heavy front doors, I could feel the tension in the air. Something felt off. I had no idea that before the night was over, my parents would look me in the eyes and tell me that I didn't have a home there anymore, that I wasn't even part of the family. Growing up in Boston's Beacon Hill wasn't just about living in a beautiful neighborhood. Our family home was a massive 5-story brownstone that overlooked Boston Common. Every corner of that house was filled with antiques and paintings that had been in the Carter family for generations. It was the kind of house people slowed down to look at when they walked by. A house that spoke of old money and power. My father, Richard Carter, built Carter Development into a massive real estate empire. His company was worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and everyone in Boston's high society knew his name. My mother, Victoria, came from an old money family herself. Her job wasn't in the office. Her role was to maintain our family's image, to make sure we were seen in the right places, doing the right things with the right people. From the time we were old enough to understand words, it was clear what was expected of us. Carter children went to the most elite schools, starting with Phillips Academy. After that, we were supposed to go to Harvard Business School. And when we graduated, we were expected to join the family business and keep the empire growing. Daniel, my older brother, was the perfect Carter child. At 6 feet tall with my father's sharp jawline and my mother's charm, he seemed destined for greatness from the very beginning. Daniel excelled at everything: sailing, sports, finance. He made connections with powerful people effortlessly and always dated women who met my parents' approval. He was their golden child, groomed to one day take over Carter Development. My younger sister, Sophie, was considered the family's free spirit, but even her rebellion had limits. She chose to attend Brown University instead of Harvard, and she majored in art history instead of business. But she still stayed close to the right social circles, dated the son of one of my father's golf buddies, and never crossed lines that would truly upset our parents. Her small acts of rebellion were tolerated because they never really threatened the family's image. And then there was me. From a young age, I questioned everything that seemed normal to my family. Why did we have so much while so many others had so little? Why did appearances matter more than what was real? Why did my parents donate to charities, only to speak negatively about the very people those charities were supposed to help? When I was 16, I volunteered at a legal aid clinic for a school project. That experience changed me forever. I watched lawyers fight for people who had nowhere else to turn, and for the first time, I saw a path that felt meaningful. It was about helping people, not just making money. That moment lit a fire inside me. So when it came time for college, I still went to Harvard. There was no escaping that expectation, but instead of following the business track, I focused on pre-law. This decision sparked endless arguments at home. My father would slam his fist on the heavy mahogany dining table, his face turning red with anger, while shouting about how I was throwing away my future. My mother's disapproval was quieter, but it cut just as deeply. She would let out a long sigh and say things like, "We gave you every opportunity, Emily. Why do you insist on disappointing us?" Even though they didn't support my choice, they still paid for my education. Maybe they hoped that by the time I graduated, I would come to my senses and join the family business. I didn't. I graduated summa cum laude, proud of my hard work. For a brief moment, I thought my parents might finally respect me. But when I told my mother that I had been accepted into Harvard Law School, She looked at me and said coldly, "What a waste of a brilliant business mind." Law school only made our relationship worse. Every family holiday turned into a battlefield of tense conversations. Even though my parents continued to pay for my tuition and my apartment in Cambridge, they reminded me constantly that this was an investment they expected to see returned by me eventually working for Carter Development, even if only as an in-house lawyer. But the more I learned about the law, the more certain I became that I didn't want to spend my life protecting corporations and profit margins. While Daniel spent his summers interning at investment banks, and Sophie traveled through Europe visiting art galleries, I spent mine working for nonprofits. I helped survivors of domestic violence navigate the legal system, and I saw firsthand how much of a difference a single lawyer could make for someone who had no other help. So, when I passed the bar exam last month, I felt proud and hopeful. I thought maybe this time my parents would see me differently. I had been offered positions at several prestigious firms, but the job I truly wanted was with a legal aid organization, the very same kind of place that had inspired me as a teenager. The night before the family dinner, I nervously called my mother. I wanted to share my accomplishment, maybe even ask her to include it in the quarterly family newsletter she always sent to their social circle. "Mom," I said, my voice shaking a little, "I passed the bar exam. Would you consider putting that in the next newsletter?" There was a pause. Then her voice came through the phone, icy and detached. "Emily, passing the bar is something thousands of people do every year. It's hardly newsworthy. Now your brother's engagement to Olivia, that's something worth celebrating." Her words stung deeply, and in that moment, a part of me knew the next night wouldn't go well. Still, I held on to hope. Olivia Parker came from a very influential family. Her father owned a massive shipping company, and their marriage would unite two powerful families, creating endless opportunities for Carter Development to expand internationally. Even though I knew the dinner was really about celebrating them, I thought maybe there would still be room for my small victory. The next evening, I arrived at our family home dressed carefully. I wore a conservative navy dress my mother had once complimented. I straightened my naturally curly dark hair into smooth waves, the way she preferred, and put on the pearl earrings my late grandmother had given me, the only family member who had ever truly loved me for who I was. As I walked up the familiar granite steps, I touched the pearls for courage and whispered to myself, maybe tonight will be different. Maybe this time they'll see me. But deep down, I had no idea just how wrong I was. The Carter family dining room was like something out of a magazine spread, a symbol of old wealth and tradition. A massive crystal chandelier sparkled above, a long mahogany table that could seat 20 people, though tonight it was set for just 6. The silverware was polished until it gleamed. The Waterford crystal glasses caught the light perfectly, and the centerpiece was a stunning antique vase filled with fresh flowers from my mother's private garden. Their sweet scent mixed with the smell of the gourmet meal our private chef had prepared. Everything about this room screamed perfection and control. I was the last to arrive. Daniel stood by the fireplace, looking like he had been born to play the role of the perfect son. His arm was draped casually around Olivia Parker, his fiancée. Olivia was the kind of woman my parents adored, tall, strikingly beautiful, with flawless blonde hair and a designer dress that probably cost more than most people made in a month. She had gone to Wellesley, earned a degree in art history, and now worked at a prestigious gallery owned by one of my mother's friends. Olivia came from a family of power and influence. Her father ran a global shipping company, which made her an even more perfect match for Daniel. Sophie was already seated at the table, pretending to be bored as she scrolled through her phone. At 25, she had perfected the art of looking disinterested while secretly paying attention to everything around her. "Good of you to join us, Emily," my father said, glancing at his expensive watch. I was technically 5 minutes early, but in the Carter household, being on time wasn't good enough. You had to be at least 15 minutes early to show proper respect. My mother approached to kiss my cheeks, her flawless makeup unmoved by the gesture. She pulled back slightly and whispered, "You could have done something more with your hair." Her words stung, but I swallowed my response. It wasn't worth the fight. Daniel stepped forward, smiling brightly. "Emily, you remember Olivia, right?" I forced a polite smile. "Of course." Congratulations on your engagement. Thank you, Olivia replied warmly, though there was a certain tone to her voice that I couldn't quite place. Daniel has told me so much about you and your unique career choices. The way she emphasized unique didn't escape me. In our world, working in public interest law wasn't seen as admirable. It was viewed as charity work, something to do if you didn't have the talent or connections to land a real job. Before I could respond, Henry, our butler of over 30 years, entered the room. Dinner is served, he announced, holding the door open for the serving staff. We all took our places at the table. Father sat at the head, Mother at the foot. Daniel and Olivia sat together on one side, while Sophie and I sat across from them. The first course was served, a delicate lobster bisque, the kind of dish that probably cost more than what many of the clients I hope to represent earned in a day. Daniel, tell Emily about the proposal, my mother said, her voice full of excitement. She loves hearing about romantic gestures. Don't you, dear? I nodded politely. Though romance had never been something my family and I openly discussed. Daniel launched into a detailed story of how he proposed on his private yacht in the Mediterranean. He described flying in a violinist from Vienna, hiring a Michelin-starred chef, and arranging for a sunset backdrop as he popped the question. Olivia blushed gracefully, clearly enjoying the attention. As Daniel spoke, I noticed my father watching me closely. It was a look I knew all too well, calculating, waiting for me to say something that would reveal my misguided values, as he called them. When Daniel finished, I smiled and said simply, "That sounds beautiful. I'm really happy for you both." A flicker of disappointment crossed my father's face. I could tell he had been hoping I would say something he could criticize, something to prove his point about me being difficult. The main course arrived, perfectly seared duck breast with a rich cherry sauce. The conversation shifted to wedding plans. It was the perfect moment for me to share my own news. I passed the bar exam, I said during a brief lull in the conversation. My voice was calm but proud. I wanted to thank both of you for supporting me through law school, even though I know it wasn't the path you would have chosen for me. The room went silent. My mother slowly lifted her wine glass and took a sip. My father focused on cutting his duck with sharp, precise movements. Finally, he spoke. Passing an exam is hardly an achievement worth mentioning at the same dinner where we're celebrating your brother's engagement. His tone was flat, dismissive. But since you brought it up, have you reconsidered my offer to join the legal department at Carter Development? I took a deep breath, knowing this was the moment I'd been dreading. Actually, I've accepted a position at the Boston Legal Aid Foundation, I said carefully. It's the organization that first inspired me to become a lawyer. The room froze. My father set down his utensils with deliberate slowness, his expression unreadable. The legal aid place you volunteered at in high school? That small charity operation. It's actually one of the most respected public interest law organizations in Massachusetts, I explained, my heartbeat quickening. They help people who have nowhere else to turn. Daniel cleared his throat awkwardly. Olivia lowered her gaze to her plate. Sophie looked at me with interest, like she was watching a movie unfold. My mother finally spoke, her voice dangerously soft. Emily, we've tolerated this little phase of rebellion. We've paid for the finest education, given you every resource, and this is how you repay us? By throwing it all away to work with. Those people, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady, are human beings who deserve legal help. This position gives me the chance to make a real difference. A real difference? My father scoffed, his voice rising. The only thing you're doing is embarrassing this family. Do you have any idea how it looks when people ask what my daughter does and I have to tell them she's chosen to work with criminals and welfare cases? That's not fair. I started, but he cut me off. Your brother is building something of value, he continued, his voice loud now, shaking with anger. He's marrying a woman who understands her place in society. And you, after everything we've given you, you choose to spit in our faces. Something inside me snapped. I never asked to be part of a family that values money over people. I blurted out before I could stop myself. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud. Even the serving staff froze, unsure what to do. My father stood slowly, his napkin falling to the floor. His face was now a frightening shade of purple. "Then perhaps you shouldn't be part of this family at all," he said coldly. "If you insist on continuing down this path, you are no longer welcome here. You are not part of this family anymore. Don't come back." For a moment I just stared at him, my mind struggling to process what I'd just heard. "Richard," my mother said quietly, but she didn't actually disagree with him. I turned to my siblings, desperately hoping for some support. Daniel wouldn't meet my eyes. Sophie looked shocked but stayed silent. "Father, you can't mean that," I said, my voice trembling. "Henry," my father called, ignoring me completely. "Please escort my former daughter out. Her apartment keys should be on the hall table. Make sure she takes them, as her financial access has been revoked effective immediately." Henry, who had been like a second father to me growing up, looked pained. This was the man who used to sneak me cookies when I was sent to bed without dinner, who had comforted me after childhood nightmares. But now he simply nodded. "This way, Miss Emily," he said softly. In a daze, I stood and followed him toward the front door. Behind me, I heard the clinking of silverware and the quiet hum of conversation as my family resumed dinner as if I had never existed. Henry handed me my coat and a small envelope containing my keys. His eyes were full of sympathy. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. "This isn't right." I stepped outside into the cool night air. The heavy door closed behind me with a loud final click, and then I heard the lock turn. I stood there for a long moment, frozen. In my hand was the key to my childhood home, now completely useless. That night felt like the longest night of my life. I stumbled down the front steps of my family home, barely able to breathe. My whole world had shifted in a matter of minutes. Just hours before, I had walked into that house hoping to share good news with my family, and now I was standing outside in the cold, disowned, and completely alone. I hailed a taxi and rode back to my Cambridge apartment in silence. It was a luxury 2-bedroom place with floor-to-ceiling windows, a doorman, and expensive furniture, everything my parents had insisted I needed for safety and comfort. The irony was painful now, knowing they were the ones who had just thrown me out and cut me off. I walked inside and sat down on my designer couch, staring blankly at the dark window. I didn't cry at first. The shock was too heavy, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake off. My phone buzzed at 11:30 p.m., jolting me back to reality. It was Sophie. "Emily, are you okay?" she whispered. Her voice was hushed, like she was hiding somewhere in the house to make the call. "What do you think, Sophie?" I managed to say, my throat tight. "It's insane," she said angrily. "I can't believe they actually did this. Father had Henry change all the locks tonight, every single one. Even the gate code." My stomach dropped. "Did you or Daniel say anything after I left?" There was a pause on the other end. Daniel said, "You brought it on yourself." Olivia just sat there and looked uncomfortable, but she didn't speak up. "I tried to defend you, Emily. I really did. But Father threatened to do the same thing to me if I didn't drop it." A part of me wasn't surprised. Daniel had always been Father's perfect soldier, the one who never questioned him. And Sophie, for all her small acts of rebellion, still relied financially on my parents. She still lived at home and worked at a gallery job that paid in prestige, not money. "There's more," Sophie said hesitantly. "Father called the family financial advisor right after dinner. He's freezing all your accounts and canceling your credit cards." I felt the numbness in my body give way to full-blown panic. "But my rent is due next week, and I don't start my new job until next month." "How am I supposed to?" "I know," she interrupted quickly. "I'll loan you what I can from my personal account, but it's not much. Father's been watching mine too." After we hung up, I immediately checked my bank accounts. My checking account, which had held about $5,000 that morning, now showed a balance of $0. My savings account, which had the remaining $15,000 from my last semester's living expenses, was completely empty as well. In disbelief, I grabbed my credit card and tried to order some food for delivery. Declined. In just a few hours. My entire financial security had been ripped away. By morning, things got even worse. I woke up to an email from my landlord. Apparently, My father had contacted him directly to inform him that my parents would no longer be guarantors on my lease, with no savings, no income yet, and now no guarantor. I had 30 days to either find someone else to back my lease or move out. I felt sick, desperate. I called the Boston Legal Aid Foundation, hoping I could start my job early. The office manager was kind and sympathetic, but she explained that their budget was strictly tied to grant cycles. My position didn't officially start for another 3 weeks. Even when it did, the starting salary was $45,000 a year. After taxes, that would barely cover rent on a tiny studio apartment in a safe neighborhood, let alone anything bigger. My hands shook as I hung up the phone. By noon, I had called 6 friends, explaining my situation. 5 of them expressed sympathy, but none offered any real help. The 6th, Jasmine, a law school classmate, understood better than anyone else. She had come from a middle-class background and knew what it was like to struggle financially. "You can stay on my couch until you figure things out," she offered without hesitation. I can't pay you right away," I admitted, my face burning with humiliation. "We all need help sometimes," Jasmine said gently. "Just pitch in for groceries when you can." Her kindness brought tears to my eyes. That afternoon, I began the painful process of dismantling the life I had built under my parents' roof. I started by calling moving companies, trying to get quotes to put my furniture into storage. But even the cheapest option was way out of my non-existent budget. Eventually, I started posting my designer furniture on resale websites. I sold my pieces for a fraction of what they were worth just to get some quick cash. The next day, I found myself walking into a pawn shop for the very first time. In my hand, get this. I clutched my grandmother's pearl necklace, the matching piece to the earrings I had worn at dinner. The shop owner examined it and said, "I can give you $800 for this. $800. The necklace was easily worth 10 times that. But I was desperate. "I'll give you a receipt," he added, noticing the pain on my face. "You can buy it back within 90 days. I swallowed hard and nodded, handing over one of the few meaningful connections I had to my grandmother. The following week was a crash course in survival. I learned to shop at discount grocery stores, choosing store brands instead of the high-end products I had always taken for granted. I discovered that the public library offered free internet, which saved me from buying overpriced coffee just to use the Wi-Fi. While job hunting, I even figured out which local bakeries threw away perfectly good bread and pastries at closing time. Living on Jasmine's couch was another education altogether. Her apartment in Somerville was tiny, about 1/3 the size of my old place. She shared it with another roommate. The furniture was mismatched, the appliances outdated, and the walls scuffed. But there was a warmth there that my luxury apartment had never had. They cooked meals together instead of ordering in. They hosted game nights instead of attending exclusive, high-profile events. One night, as we sat around the table eating a simple pasta dinner that had cost less than $20 to feed all 3 of us, I thought to myself, is this what normal people live like? And for the first time, I realized how isolated my upbringing had been. 2 weeks after being disowned, I finally found a temporary job. It was at a document review company, a boring position where I spent hours staring at files and scanning pages. The pay was just enough to cover my share of groceries at Jasmine's place and start saving a tiny bit toward getting my own apartment. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't what I had gone to Harvard Law for. But it was something. At night, I would lie awake on Jasmine's couch, staring at the ceiling. Sometimes I cried quietly, the pain of rejection and loss overwhelming me. But alongside the grief, something else was beginning to grow, a quiet strength I didn't know I had. For the first time in my life, I was standing completely on my own. It was terrifying. It was humbling. But it was also strangely liberating. Then, exactly 1 week after that disastrous dinner, something happened that would change everything all over again. I was using Jasmine's laptop to check my email when a new message appeared in my inbox. The sender's name made my stomach drop. George Hamilton. George had been my father's attorney for as long as I could remember. The subject line read, "Urgent. Please call immediately." My heart pounded. My mind began racing through every worst-case scenario. Had my father found a way to sabotage my new job offer? Was he suing me for something? What more could they possibly take from me? The email itself was short and formal. Dear Miss Carter, a matter of extreme urgency has come to my attention regarding your financial situation. Please contact me at your earliest convenience to discuss. This is time sensitive and impacts you directly. Regards, George Hamilton. I stared at the screen, completely frozen. Jasmine leaned over my shoulder. Sounds fishy. Why would your parents' lawyer be reaching out to you if they cut you off? I don't know, I admitted, my hands trembling. But George has known me since I was a kid. He's always been fair, even kind, despite working for my father. After pacing the room for nearly an hour, I finally gathered the courage to call the number listed in his email. Hamilton and Associates. How may I direct your call? The receptionist answered smoothly. This is Emily Carter for George Hamilton, I said, amazed at how steady my voice sounded. After a brief hold, his familiar voice came through the line. Emily, he said, relief evident in his tone. Thank you for calling. I was worried you might ignore my message. I almost did, I admitted. I'm not exactly eager to hear more bad news from my family's lawyer. He cleared his throat nervously. This isn't what you think. Emily, there's something very delicate we need to discuss. Could we meet in person? Preferably somewhere private. I hesitated. My suspicion was strong, but so was my curiosity. I'll meet you, I said cautiously, but only in a public place. We agreed to meet the next day at a coffee shop near Boston Common. As I hung up, my heart raced. Whatever this was, it felt big, too big to even imagine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that my parents had been hiding something from me. The next afternoon, I arrived at the coffee shop 20 minutes early. I chose a table near the window, one where I had a clear view of both the entrance and the exit. My nerves were on edge. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting to see my father walk in with a team of lawyers ready to humiliate me all over again. When George Hamilton finally appeared, I almost didn't recognize him. He looked older, more tired than I remembered. His usually perfect suit seemed slightly rumpled, and there were deep lines of worry around his eyes. Emily, he said, taking the seat across from me. Thank you for agreeing to meet. George, I replied cautiously. What's this about? Your email sounded urgent. He glanced around the busy cafe, making sure no one was close enough to overhear us. Then he leaned forward and lowered his voice. Emily, are you familiar with the trust your grandmother set up for you before she passed away? His question caught me completely off guard. My grandmother, Rose Carter, had been my father's mother. She was nothing like him. Kind, warm, and always genuinely interested in my life. She had been the only person in my family who truly accepted me for who I was. When she died when I was 16, it was one of the hardest losses of my life. I know she left some money for each of us, I said slowly, trying to recall the details. But Father always told me it was just a small education fund that was used up during college. George's expression tightened. That's not entirely accurate. A cold feeling crept into my stomach. What do you mean? Your grandmother established a trust for each grandchild, he explained carefully. Daniel received his when he turned 25, as outlined in the documents. Sophie will receive hers next year when she reaches that age. And mine? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Yours was different, George said. His eyes softened slightly as he spoke. Your grandmother. She saw something in you, Emily. She knew you were different from the rest of the family. She wanted to make sure you were protected. My throat tightened. I thought of my grandmother's warm smile, the way she used to pull me aside during family gatherings and tell me stories about her own life, stories no one else seemed to know. She set up your trust so that you would gain access to it either when you turned 30 or when you completed graduate school, whichever came first, George continued. The money was specifically designated for education and housing, to give you freedom if you ever needed it. I sat back, stunned. So there's a trust in my name? How much are we talking about here? George took a deep breath. $2 million. The words didn't register at first. The coffee shop seemed to tilt around me. 2 million, I repeated, almost choking on the number. And my parents never told me? He nodded grimly. The trust has been carefully managed and has grown over the years since your grandmother set it up. Your parents have been the administrators until the conditions were met. When you passed the bar exam last month, you officially fulfilled the requirement. The funds should have transferred to your control immediately. Then why didn't they? I demanded, my voice shaking. George looked deeply uncomfortable. He ran a hand over his face, as if trying to wipe away the stress. Your father instructed me not to process the transfer, he admitted finally. When I reminded him that it was legally required, he suggested other ways to interpret the trust's language, ways to delay it indefinitely. My shock turned quickly to anger. So he's been stealing from me? Not technically stealing, George clarified quickly. The funds are still there. But your parents have been borrowing against the assets of the trust to fund various family business projects. That is a direct violation of their legal duty as trustees. I stared at him in disbelief. Why are you telling me this now? You work for them, George. Not me. He held my gaze steadily. Because what they're doing is illegal. And as an officer of the court, I can't continue to be part of it. When your father asked me to draft documents removing you from other family holdings after last week's disagreement, I had to review all the relevant files. That's when I saw the full extent of what was happening. I leaned back in my chair, trying to catch my breath. You think I'm going to sue them? I said slowly. George nodded. If you took this to any competent attorney, they'd advise you to file a lawsuit immediately. And you'd win, without question. So, what do my parents want now? I asked bitterly. They want to meet, he explained. They've suggested a meeting at my office tomorrow afternoon. Before you agree, I wanted you to fully understand your position. My position? I asked, my voice sharp. Emily, George said seriously, you hold all the leverage here. Your parents know that. They're panicking. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. I glanced down and saw a text message from my mother. Emily, darling, we need to talk. Your father was upset and said things he didn't mean. Family is everything to us. Please come home. I showed the message to George. He nodded knowingly. They're trying to get ahead of this. Don't let them guilt you into anything. After George left, I sat alone at the coffee shop for nearly an hour, trying to process everything. My grandmother had believed in me enough to set aside a fortune just for me. She had trusted me to use it wisely, to live a life on my own terms, and my parents had hidden it from me. Worse, they had used it for their own gain, all while pretending it didn't exist. That night, I met with a financial advisor George recommended, someone with no connection to my family. She confirmed everything George had said and laid out my options clearly. By the time I left her office, a calm determination had settled over me. For the first time since that horrible dinner, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The next day, I walked into the sleek downtown offices of Hamilton and Associates. The building towered over the city with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered stunning views of Boston Harbor. I had been here many times as a child, always tagging along with my father. Back then, I was told to sit quietly and observe how real business is done. But today, I wasn't there as Richard Carter's obedient daughter. Today, I was there as Emily Carter, attorney at law with my own legal representation by my side. Her name was Susan Park, a brilliant and fierce trust attorney recommended by one of my law professors. When I explained my situation to her, she had agreed to take my case immediately, intrigued not just by the legal challenge, but also by the opportunity to stand up to one of Boston's most powerful families. As we rode up in the elevator, Susan turned to me. Remember, she said firmly, we're not here to start a fight, but we are fully prepared for one. I nodded, taking a deep breath. When we stepped into the reception area, the receptionist, who had known me since I was a child, looked startled to see me. She gave a nervous glance to Susan, then directed us to the large conference room. Inside, my parents were already seated. My father looked as sharp as ever in a perfectly tailored suit, though there was tension in his jaw that gave him away. My mother wore an elegant cream-colored dress, her pearls gleaming as always. Her expression was carefully composed, showing just enough concern to seem maternal without giving away any real emotion. George sat at the head of the table, several neatly arranged folders in front of him. The surprise on my parents' faces when they saw Susan by my side was almost satisfying enough to make the entire ordeal worthwhile. "Emily," my mother said, rising as if to embrace me. "Who is this?" I stepped back before she could touch me. "This is Susan Park, my attorney." My father's eyes narrowed. "There's no need for outside counsel. This is a family matter." I met his gaze steadily. "You made it very clear that I'm not family anymore." "Susan stays." George cleared his throat nervously. "Now that everyone is here, let's begin." He opened a folder and spoke clearly, his tone strictly professional. "The trust established by Rose Carter for her granddaughter, Emily, stipulated that the funds would be released upon completion of graduate education. That condition has been met. The trust, currently valued at approximately $2.3 million, must be transferred to Emily's control immediately." My father leaned forward, his voice smooth and measured. "Before we proceed with any transfers, I think we all agree that family unity is most important. Emily, your mother and I have talked about what happened last week, and we're willing to move past it. We want to put that unpleasantness behind us." I noticed he didn't actually apologize. Typical. My mother reached across the table as if to take my hand, but I kept mine firmly in my lap. "Darling," she said sweetly, "you know how your father can get when he's passionate." The things he said, they weren't meant literally. "Of course you're still part of the family," Susan spoke up firmly. "My client appreciates the sentiment, but we're here to discuss the trust. We'll need full documentation of every transaction involving trust assets over the past 12 years, including any loans taken against the trust as collateral." My father's carefully crafted mask slipped. His warmth vanished in an instant. "That won't be necessary," he snapped. "We have a proposal that resolves everything amicably." He nodded to George, who reluctantly slid a document across the table toward Susan. I recognized it immediately, a trust transfer agreement. "But there were changes. We're prepared to acknowledge your right to the trust," my father said smoothly. "But as family, we know you'll want to support the Carter legacy. This agreement simply restructures the assets to better integrate with our family's overall holdings." Susan scanned the document quickly, then raised her eyebrows. "Mr. Carter," she said evenly, "this agreement would effectively give your company full control over Emily's trust. She'd receive a small annual payment, but no actual authority over her own money. It's financial security for her," my father countered, his tone calm but firm, "while keeping the family's interests aligned. It's a win-win." A bitter laugh rose in my throat, but I swallowed it back. This was exactly who they were. I stared at my father across the polished conference table, my hands resting in my lap to hide how tightly they were clenched. It was happening again. That same feeling I'd had my entire life, the mix of anger and disappointment whenever my true self collided with my parents' expectations. But this time, something was different. This time, I wasn't a powerless little girl desperate for their approval. I was a Harvard-educated attorney sitting across from two people who had lied to me, manipulated me, and used my inheritance for their own gain. A memory of my grandmother suddenly came back to me. I was 12 years old, proudly showing her a story I had written for school. My parents had rolled their eyes, calling it a waste of time. But my grandmother had read every word carefully, then looked at me with love and said, "Emily, you have a gift for seeing the truth of things. Never let anyone take that away from you, not even family. Especially not family." Now, I understood why she had structured my trust differently from Daniel's and Sophie's. She had seen the truth about my parents long before I did. She knew this day would come and had built a safety net for me. I slid the document back across the table toward my father. "No," I said firmly. My father blinked, clearly taken aback. "I don't think you understand what's being offered here." "I understand perfectly," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "You disowned me. You cut me off financially. And now, you're trying to manipulate me into giving up control of what's rightfully mine because you were caught misusing it." "Emily," my mother interrupted, her tone sharp but pleading. "Your father is offering to bring you back into the family, on the condition that I sign over my inheritance." I finished for her. "That's not family, Mother. That's a business deal. My father's face turned red, that familiar color of anger I had grown up fearing. This attitude, he thundered, is exactly why we've had problems. You've always been ungrateful for everything we've given you. Susan stepped in calmly, but with force. Mr. Carter, let me be very clear. My client is entitled to full control of her trust, effective immediately. Furthermore, as trustees, you and Mrs. Carter have breached your fiduciary duty by leveraging these assets for business purposes without Emily's authorization. That's absurd! My father snapped, his voice rising. Everything we did was for the benefit of all Carter holdings. George looked pained, his hands folded tightly on the table. Finally, he spoke. Richard, I've reviewed the documentation myself. The loans against Emily's trust were explicitly prohibited by the terms Rose set in place. There's no ambiguity here. This was a violation. For the first time, I saw fear flicker in my father's eyes. He turned to me, his tone shifting suddenly. His voice became softer, almost coaxing. Emily, be reasonable. If you go down this path, you'll never work in this city again. The Carter name still carries weight. One word from me, and that little legal aid job you're so proud of will disappear. His threat sent a chill through me. Once upon a time it might have worked, but not today. I met his gaze, unflinching. Is that really the approach you want to take? Threatening me? I asked quietly. Because Susan has prepared documentation for probate court outlining every illegal financial movement from my trust. I'm also sure the Massachusetts Bar Association would be very interested to hear how a prominent businessman tried to intimidate a newly licensed attorney into silence. My father's jaw clenched, but he didn't respond just then. The conference room door opened. Daniel and Sophie walked in. Clearly, my parents had called for reinforcements. Emily, Daniel said smoothly, using that calm, reasonable voice he always used when he wanted to control a situation. You're taking this too far. We're family. We work things out together, not with outside lawyers and threats. Sophie stayed silent, but her eyes darted between us nervously. I turned back to my parents. I'm not the one who took this too far, I said, my voice trembling with emotion. You're the ones who told me I wasn't part of this family anymore. You're the ones who threw me out of my home without a second thought. You're the ones who illegally used my inheritance. I swallowed hard, holding back tears. And now that you've been caught, you expect me to simply forget all of that. Because of family loyalty? I paused, looking directly at my father. Loyalty goes both ways. The room went silent. Even Daniel didn't have a response to that. Finally, my father slammed his hands on the table and stood abruptly. I've heard enough, he barked. Either you sign this agreement and return to the family on our terms, or you pursue this legally and guarantee that you will never have a relationship with any of us again. It was the same ultimatum he had always given me, his way or nothing. But this time, I saw it for what it really was, a desperate attempt to maintain control. I stood slowly, my hands no longer shaking. I choose me, I said clearly. I choose the path Grandma Rose believed in enough to protect. I choose a life where I am valued for who I am, not for what I can add to the Carter balance sheet. Susan gathered her files and rose beside me. You'll regret this, my father roared as I turned toward the door. Without us, you're nothing. I paused at the doorway and looked back. My father's face was red with rage, my mother's expression tight with anger and fear. Daniel's face was blank, while Sophie's eyes were wide and wet with unshed tears. I took a deep breath. Actually, I said calmly, I think I'm just beginning to discover who I really am. Then I walked out without looking back. As the elevator doors closed, Susan let out a low whistle. That was impressive, she said, shaking her head slightly. Most people would have caved under that kind of family pressure. I gave a small, tired smile. I have had 28 years of practice standing up to them. The only difference now is I finally have the power to walk away. When we stepped out into the bright Boston afternoon, the air felt lighter. My chest felt lighter. The pain wasn't gone, far from it. 2 decades of conditional love didn't disappear overnight. But for the first time, I could see a future that was entirely mine, free from their control. The first thing I did after gaining control of my trust was Nothing. Susan strongly advised me to take some time before making any major financial decisions. She reminded me that for years, my finances had been completely controlled by my parents. Now I had the freedom to make my own choices, and I needed to be thoughtful about that. For the next few weeks, I stayed on Jasmine's couch, deeply grateful for her support. When I finally moved out, it wasn't into a luxury building like the one my parents had forced me into before. Instead, I bought a modest one-bedroom apartment in Jamaica Plain, a diverse neighborhood I had never spent much time in while growing up in my sheltered world. The apartment was small, but it was mine, paid for in full using a portion of my trust. No one could take it away from me. When my position at Boston Legal Aid finally began, I threw myself into the work. The salary was modest, but I didn't care. I had financial security now, but I chose to live primarily on my earned income, saving my trust for long-term investments and meaningful projects. My first cases were tough, but rewarding: tenant eviction defenses, domestic violence protection orders, public benefits appeals. Each client had a story, a struggle. And every time I listened, I saw the same patterns: powerful people exploiting the vulnerable, systems failing those who needed help the most. For the first time in my life, my work felt deeply meaningful. 2 months after the confrontation in George's office, I got an unexpected call from Sophie. "Emily," she said cautiously, "can we meet?" Just the two of us. We met at a small cafe in my new neighborhood. Sophie looked out of place in her designer clothes, surrounded by mismatched chairs and local art. "So, this is how the other half lives?" she joked lightly, though there was an edge to her voice. "Most of the world lives this way," I replied with a small smile. Our bubble was the exception, not the rule. Over the next 2 hours, we talked more openly than we ever had. She admitted that she envied my courage to walk away. I admitted that even with my newfound independence, I still carried pain and fear. "Father uses your empty seat at dinner as a warning," Sophie confessed, her eyes sad. "He reminds us what happens to anyone who defies him. But honestly, I think he's scared. The business hasn't been doing as well without access to your trust as leverage." I felt a pang of guilt. I never wanted to hurt the company or the employees who work there. "Maybe you could help," Sophie suggested. "Not by giving in, but by advising them legally. You have skills they could use." I shook my head. "They don't want my help. They want my compliance." There's a difference. As summer turned autumn, I settled into my new life. My days were filled with work at the clinic. My evenings and weekends spent building a community beyond the narrow social circle of my childhood. I joined a local community garden. I volunteered at a youth writing program. I even started dating someone I met at a neighborhood potluck, a high school history teacher with no connection to Boston's elite. As the holidays approached, I realized it would be the first time I'd spend them without my family. It was both liberating and terrifying. When Jasmine invited me to her family's chaotic Thanksgiving celebration, I said yes. The day was noisy, messy, and filled with laughter. At dinner, Jasmine's father raised his glass and said warmly, "To Emily, the newest member of our chosen family." The simple words brought tears to my eyes. This was what family should feel like: unconditional acceptance, not constant judgment. Christmas was just around the corner when I received an unexpected phone call. The caller introduced herself as Margaret Wilson, one of my grandmother's oldest friends. I vaguely remembered meeting her when I was a child, but we hadn't spoken in years. Her voice was warm and kind, the kind of tone that immediately reminded me of Grandma Rose. "Emily," she said gently, "I just wanted to tell you that your grandmother would be so proud of you." I blinked, stunned. You know what's been happening." Margaret let out a small laugh. "Oh, honey. Boston's old money circle talks. People know more than you think. But more importantly, I knew Rose. She always saw something special in you. You were different from the rest of them, and she loved you deeply for it." Her words hit me straight in the heart. I didn't realize Grandma had her own conflicts with the family, I admitted, my throat tight. "Of course she did," Margaret said. "Why do you think she set up your trusts the way she did?" "She fought similar battles with her husband that you've been fighting with Richard. The only difference is, Rose never found the courage to break free completely. She wanted to make sure you'd have that option. As I listened, something inside me began to heal. For so long, I had carried this heavy sense of failure, this belief that I was the problem, that there was something wrong with me because I couldn't fit into the mold my parents wanted. But now, I realized the truth. My grandmother had seen what I saw. She had understood the toxic dynamics in our family, and she had done everything she could to protect me. It wasn't that I didn't belong. It was that I never should have been forced to belong in the first place. In January, inspired by that conversation, I decided to honor my grandmother's legacy in a meaningful way. I used a portion of my trust to establish a scholarship fund for law students who came from difficult family backgrounds and who wanted to pursue public interest law. I named it the Rose Carter Fellowship. I wanted to help future lawyers follow their passions without being held back by financial fears or family pressure. The first recipient of the fellowship was a brilliant young woman who had been homeless as a teenager. Watching her chase her dreams without the burden of financial insecurity gave me a deep sense of fulfillment, far greater than any luxury purchase ever had. Meanwhile, my own work at Boston Legal Aid was starting to gain attention. One of my cases involved a group of immigrant families who were being illegally evicted by a greedy landlord. The situation was heartbreaking: children at risk of losing their homes, families being treated like they didn't matter. After months of preparation and countless late nights, I won the case. The decision set a powerful legal precedent that would protect hundreds of vulnerable tenants across the city. A small article about the victory appeared in the Boston Globe. When the reporter asked me about my background, I answered truthfully but carefully. I acknowledged my family name but made it clear that I had chosen a very different path. The next day, I received a text message from my mother. "We saw the newspaper. Your father is concerned about the family image. Please be discreet in future press interactions. No congratulations. No acknowledgement of the lives I had helped. Just a warning about appearances." Her message confirmed what I already knew. I had made the right choice by walking away. 6 months after being disowned, I received an invitation that surprised me. It was to a fundraising gala for legal aid organizations across Massachusetts. Normally, staff attorneys like me wouldn't be invited to such high-profile events, but because of my recent case victory, they wanted me to attend. When the night of the gala arrived, I chose a simple, elegant black dress, not one of the flashy designer gowns my mother would have approved of. For jewelry, I wore my grandmother's pearl earrings. As soon as I'd been able, I had bought back her matching necklace from the pawn shop. The moment I held it in my hands again, I'd cried. Those pearls weren't just jewelry. They were a symbol of love, strength, and freedom. The gala was held in a grand ballroom filled with Boston's legal elite. As I mingled and spoke with other attorneys, I felt a quiet sense of pride. I wasn't there as Richard Carter's daughter. I was there as Emily Carter, attorney, making a difference on my own terms. Then, I felt a familiar presence behind me. I turned and came face to face with my parents for the first time since the confrontation in George's office. My breath caught. My father looked older. The stress of the past months had left new lines on his face. My mother was as immaculate as ever, her hair perfectly styled, her smile carefully practiced. "Emily," she said, leaning in for an air kiss, as if nothing had ever happened. "How lovely to see you." My father nodded stiffly. "You're looking well." The judge I'd been speaking with quickly excused herself, sensing the tension. "I am well," I said simply. "My work has been very fulfilling." "Yes, we read about your case," my father said, managing to make it sound almost trivial. "I hope you're being careful not to antagonize the real estate community. They have long memories." I met his gaze evenly. "I'm representing people who deserve justice. That's all that matters to me." For just a second, I saw that familiar flicker of disappointment in his eyes, the same look he'd given me my whole life whenever I failed to meet his expectations. "You always did miss the bigger picture," he said, his voice tinged with disdain. "Actually," I said quietly, "I think I finally see it clearly. There's more to life than profit margins and social standing." Before he could respond, a young attorney from another nonprofit rushed up to me, his face bright with excitement. "Are you Emily Carter?" he asked eagerly. "Your strategy in the Riverview Apartments case was brilliant. We're using it as a model for our own litigation in Worcester. The pride I felt in that moment was indescribable. It was a sharp, beautiful contrast to the cold dismissal in my father's eyes. Two different worlds, two completely different definitions of success colliding right there in that ballroom. My mother's smile faltered slightly. "We should be going," she said to my father, clearly uncomfortable with the public display of my success outside their control. "The Parkers are expecting us." As they turned to leave, my father hesitated. "The family business is struggling," he admitted reluctantly. "Without certain leveraging options we previously had, we've had to scale back. Daniel is doing his best, but..." He trailed off, clearly pained by the admission. "We could use your cooperation." It was the closest he had ever come to saying they needed me. I took a deep breath. "I'm sorry to hear about the difficulties, truly. But my trust isn't a family slush fund. It was Grandma Rose's gift to me, not to Carter Development." His face hardened immediately. "You've really turned your back on everything we built for you." "No," I said gently, but firmly. "I've simply built something new for myself, something Grandma Rose would be proud of." They left without another word. As I watched them disappear into the crowd, a realization settled over me like a warm blanket. For so many years, I had been chasing their approval, desperate for scraps of affection and acknowledgement, but I didn't need that anymore. The ache of rejection was still there, yes. It probably always would be. But it no longer defined me. I had built my own life, my own definition of success, my own chosen family. Later that night, I returned to my small apartment, looked out at the Boston skyline, and smiled. The grand mansion where I had grown up might have been bigger, fancier, more impressive, but it had never felt like home. This modest space, filled with secondhand furniture and genuine love, was my true home. For the first time in my life, I felt completely at peace. By spring, nearly a year had passed since that disastrous family dinner. My work at Boston Legal Aid had grown beyond entry-level cases. I now led a small team focused on housing justice. I mentored younger attorneys while still handling my own caseload. The Rose Carter Fellowship had also selected its second recipient, a first-generation law student who had overcome incredible hardships to make it to law school. Every time I saw the joy and relief on the faces of those students, I knew I was honoring my grandmother's memory. Sophie and I had continued rebuilding our relationship. We met for coffee or dinner at least once a month, always away from the watchful eyes of our parents. During one of our meetings, she stirred her drink thoughtfully and said, "Have you thought about what you'll do when my trust comes to me next year?" I raised an eyebrow. "Have you?" She gave a small, nervous laugh. "I just know one thing. I don't want Father to control it. I've been talking to Susan about setting up protections." Pride swelled in my chest. Sophie was slowly, cautiously beginning to carve her own path. It hadn't been easy for her, and our parents didn't make it any easier. Her growing independence was putting serious strain on their relationship. Meanwhile, Daniel had doubled down on his loyalty to Father. He barely acknowledged me whenever we crossed paths at social events. To him, I was a traitor, someone who had rejected everything he held sacred. One day in early spring, I received an envelope in the mail. It was an invitation to the annual Carter family Easter brunch, an event I had attended every single year of my life. The brunch was a huge deal, filled with extended family members and business associates. I had assumed my name was permanently erased from the guest list after everything that had happened. Inside the envelope was a handwritten note. It read simply, "Family should be together for the holidays." It was signed, Mother. When I showed it to Jasmine, she raised an eyebrow. "Are you going to go?" I hesitated. Part of me wants to show them I've moved on, that I'm happy without their approval. But another part of me worries I'd be sucked right back into their world. After thinking about it for days, I decided to decline politely but firmly. Instead of spending Easter surrounded by forced smiles and judgment, I volunteered at a community meal program with my friends from the neighborhood. The joy and connection I felt there confirmed that I had made the right choice. 2 weeks later, I was shopping at the local farmer's market when fate decided to surprise me. I rounded a corner and came face to face with my parents. They looked wildly out of place among the colorful stalls and lively crowd. My mother clutched her designer handbag like a shield, while my father's posture was stiff and uncomfortable. Emily, my mother said, startled. What a surprise. I live here, I said, holding up my canvas bag full of fresh produce. What about you too? Your father's doctor suggested he eat more organic foods, she explained awkwardly. We thought we'd try shopping here. Before I could respond, a small child ran past us and bumped into my mother, causing her to stumble backward into a puddle. Her expensive shoes were instantly ruined. I braced myself for the explosion, for the anger, and snide remarks that always followed any mishap, but instead, my father reached out and steadied her. Concern etched on his face. It startled me more than anything else. Are you okay, James? I asked carefully, noticing a slight tremor in his hand. Minor heart issue, he said quickly, brushing it off. Nothing serious. But the tightness around his eyes told a different story. My mother glanced between us, then made an unexpected suggestion. Perhaps we could sit down for some coffee. There's a place just over there. We walked to a small cafe near the farmer's market. It was the kind of cozy, unpretentious place I'd grown to love. Mismatched chairs, the smell of fresh coffee, and a steady hum of conversation. My parents, however, looked completely out of place. My mother perched on the edge of her chair like the seat might stain her designer dress, while my father sat stiffly, clearly uncomfortable in the casual atmosphere. As we sipped our drinks, there was an awkward silence. Finally, my mother cleared her throat. Emily, she began carefully. We were hoping to have a civil conversation. No lawyers, no arguments, just family. The word family hung in the air, heavy with all the unspoken pain between us. I took a deep breath. All right, I'm listening. My father's voice was quieter than usual, almost hesitant. I owe you an apology, he said, surprising me so much I nearly dropped my cup. For how I handled things last year. I let my temper and my pride get in the way of reason. For a moment, I just stared at him, stunned. My father had never apologized to me, not once in my entire life. I shouldn't have said what I did at that dinner, he continued, his jaw tight. I shouldn't have cut you off or used your trust the way I did. It was wrong. The sincerity in his tone was unmistakable, but part of me wondered if it was genuine remorse or simply desperation. Why now? I asked carefully. Why are you telling me this today? He sighed heavily, looking older and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen him. Because things have changed. My health isn't what it used to be. The company isn't what it used to be either. My mother placed a perfectly manicured hand on his arm. The truth is, Emily, the business is in trouble. Daniel is trying, but without the financial flexibility we had before, it's been very difficult. The puzzle pieces began clicking into place. You're here because you want access to my trust again, I said flatly. No, my father said quickly, shaking his head. We know that's not possible. We wouldn't dare ask for that again. He paused, clearly choosing his words carefully. We're here because we need your help, not your money, but your skills. That was the last thing I expected him to say. What do you mean? I asked, frowning. There's a series of legal disputes threatening Carter development, he explained. Contract issues, zoning battles, potential lawsuits from contractors. We've always had top corporate lawyers, but this is different. It's messy. It's emotional. It requires someone who can navigate both the legal system and the human side of things. My mother leaned forward, her eyes pleading. You've proven yourself, Emily. Your recent case victory was even in the newspaper. We know you have the ability to handle these situations. I let out a bitter laugh. When I won that case, you didn't even congratulate me. You texted me to warn me about family image. My mother flinched. I didn't know what to say at the time. I shook my head. You've spent my entire life minimizing my accomplishments unless they benefited you directly. And now, suddenly, you see value in what I do because it might save your company. Emily, my father said firmly, this isn't about us versus you. It's about survival. If these lawsuits go badly, hundreds of employees could lose their jobs. That gave me pause. Despite everything, I didn't want innocent people to suffer because of my family's dysfunction. But I also wasn't naive. You don't get to use Guilt is a weapon anymore, I said quietly. If you truly want my help, it has to be on my terms. My father nodded slowly. Name your terms. The power dynamic had shifted, and for the first time, I held the upper hand. I took a deep breath, carefully considering my words. First, full transparency. I get complete access to all documents, contracts, and financial statements related to these disputes. No secrets, no omissions. Agreed, my father said immediately, surprising me again. Second, I continued, I work independently. I'm not your daughter in this role, I'm your attorney. That means no family drama, no emotional manipulation. My mother's lips tightened, but she nodded. Double quotes in third, I said firmly. I don't answer to Daniel. I answer only to myself and the law. At this, my father hesitated. Daniel had always been his right-hand man, the golden child who could do no wrong. But after a long pause, he gave a single, reluctant nod. Understood. Over the next several weeks, I immersed myself in the company's legal issues. It was grueling work. I spent long hours reviewing contracts, meeting with city officials, and mediating disputes between angry parties. Slowly, I began to uncover the root of the problems. Some were the result of careless mistakes by upper management. Others stemmed from aggressive expansion tactics my father had approved, without fully considering the consequences. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became that Daniel wasn't the perfect leader everyone believed him to be. One evening, as I pored over yet another stack of documents, Sophie called. How's it going? She asked gently. Exhausting, I admitted. But eye-opening. There's so much chaos behind the scenes. It's like they've been patching holes in a sinking ship instead of fixing the actual leaks. Are you glad you agreed to help? She asked cautiously. I thought about it for a moment. I don't know yet. Part of me feels good about protecting the employees and saving the company's reputation. But another part of me worries that I'm just enabling bad behavior again. Sophie was quiet for a moment. You're not enabling them. You're setting boundaries this time. That's different. Her words stayed with me. As my work with the company continued, my relationship with Daniel grew more strained. He resented my involvement, seeing it as a challenge to his authority. During one particularly heated meeting, he slammed his fist on the table. You think you're better than me because you walked away, Emily. But you wouldn't even have a law degree if it weren't for this family's money. I kept my voice calm. You're right. I'm grateful for the opportunities I had. But gratitude doesn't mean blind obedience. Daniel sneered. You always were selfish. I stood, gathering my papers. No, Daniel. I finally learned to stop sacrificing myself for people who will never see me as enough. The room fell silent. Even my father didn't intervene. After 3 months of hard work, I successfully negotiated settlements for 2 major lawsuits and implemented new policies to prevent future problems. The company's reputation began to recover. Employees who had been living in fear of layoffs started to relax. One evening, my father approached me privately. I underestimated you, he admitted gruffly. You saved this company. His words were stiff, awkward, but they were also genuine. I didn't do it for you, I said quietly. I did it for the people who work here, the ones who depend on these jobs to feed their families. He nodded slowly, accepting my answer without argument. For the first time, I saw something in his eyes that looked like respect. As my involvement wound down, I prepared to step away entirely. My terms had always been clear. I wasn't returning to the family fold. This was a temporary alliance, nothing more. On my last day at the office, Daniel cornered me in the hallway. You think you've won, he spat bitterly. But you'll always be an outsider. No matter how much you accomplish, you'll never truly belong here. I met his glare with calm defiance. That's where you're wrong. I don't want to belong here. I belong in the life I've built for myself. Then I walked away, leaving him standing there, speechless. That evening, I went to Jasmine's apartment for dinner. As we sat around the table laughing with her roommates, I realized how far I'd come. Just a year ago, I'd been terrified and alone, sleeping on her couch with no money and no plan. Now I had stability, purpose, and relationships built on love and respect rather than control and obligation. Jasmine raised her glass. To Emily. she toasted. The woman who proved that blood might be thick, but chosen family is stronger. We clinked glasses, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. But freedom, I soon learned, came with new challenges. One evening, Sophie called me in tears. "It's happening to me now," she sobbed. "Father found out I've been meeting with Susan to set up protections for my trust. He called me ungrateful and threatened to cut me off. My heart broke for her. "You don't have to go through this alone," I said firmly. "You have me. And now that I've been through it, I know exactly how to fight back." Sophie sniffled. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You are," I assured her. "And even if you stumble, I'll be there to catch you." In that moment, I realized something profound. My journey hadn't just been about saving myself, it had been about breaking a generational cycle of control and fear so that Sophie and anyone who came after us could have a different future. The next few weeks were a blur of planning and preparation. Sophie and I met with Susan at her office almost every evening, carefully going through every legal option available. "This won't be easy," Susan warned us, sliding a stack of documents across the table. "Your father is skilled at intimidation. He'll try to make Sophie feel guilty, scared, or both. But we're going to protect her trust before he even realizes what's happening." Sophie nodded, though her hands trembled as she signed the initial paperwork. I reached across the table and squeezed her fingers. "You're doing the right thing," I said softly. "It feels terrifying now, but soon you'll feel free." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know how you did this alone last year." I smiled sadly. "I didn't, not really. I had Jasmine and Susan and even Grandma Rose in spirit. Now you have all of us." Those words seemed to give her strength. The confrontation came sooner than we expected. One evening, while Sophie was at our apartment preparing dinner, she received a furious call from our father. "How dare you go behind my back?" He shouted so loudly that I could hear him from across the room. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me?" Sophie's face went pale, but her voice stayed surprisingly steady. "I'm not a child anymore, Father. I'm allowed to make my own decisions. Not when those decisions jeopardize this family." He roared. "If you sign those papers, consider yourself cut off. You'll have no home, no income, nothing." I took the phone gently from Sophie's trembling hands. "Hello, Father," I said calmly. There was a pause on the line. Then his voice dripped with disdain. "Of course. This has your fingerprints all over it. You've been poisoning your sister against me." "No," I said firmly. "I've been showing her the truth. The same truth you tried to hide from me for years. You think you've won because you took your trust back," he spat. "But you'll regret this. Both of you will." "No," I replied, my tone steady. "The only thing we regret is letting you control us for so long. That ends tonight." Before he could respond, I ended the call. Sophie burst into tears, sobbing against my shoulder. "I can't believe I actually stood up to him," she whispered. I hugged her tightly. "You were incredible. I'm so proud of you." A week later, the paperwork was finalized. Sophie's trust was secured in a separate legal entity completely outside of our parents' control. When Susan handed her the final documents, Sophie exhaled deeply, like she'd been holding her breath for years. "I can't believe it," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "For the first time, I feel like my future is really mine." "That's because it is," Susan said warmly. "Your grandmother set this up to give you freedom. And now, thanks to Emily's courage, you've claimed it." Sophie hugged me tightly. "I couldn't have done this without you," I smiled, brushing a tear from her face. We did it together. As spring turned into summer, the tension with our parents reached a boiling point. Daniel sided completely with Father, echoing his anger and accusations. Family gatherings became battlegrounds, and soon Sophie stopped attending altogether. I had already cut off contact, but I kept hoping that one day, things might change. My mother occasionally sent polite, distant messages, updates about extended family, invitations to events I always declined. It was clear she didn't know how to navigate this new reality, torn between loyalty to my father and love for her daughters. Then in late June, I received a call I wasn't expecting. It was from George Hamilton. The family lawyer who had first exposed the truth about my trust. Emily, he said gravely. Your father had a minor heart episode last night. He's stable now, but the doctors are warning him to slow down. My breath caught. Despite everything, the thought of losing him sent a sharp pang through my chest. Thank you for letting me know, I said softly. That evening, I told Sophie. She was conflicted, too angry at him, yet worried. We should visit, she said finally. Even if it's just to show him we care, no matter what's happened. Walking into that hospital room was surreal. My father looked smaller somehow. Frailer, lying there in a plain hospital gown instead of his usual sharp suit. He opened his eyes when we entered, surprise flickering across his face. Sophie, he said weakly. Emily. Hi, Dad, Sophie said, her voice trembling. We just wanted to see how you're doing. He swallowed hard, his throat working as if words were difficult. I'm tired, but alive. We sat by his bedside, the three of us silent for a long moment. Finally, I spoke. No matter what's happened between us, we don't want to lose you. His eyes glistened, and, for a brief second, I saw not the controlling patriarch, but just a man who had spent his life terrified of losing control. I know I've been hard on you, he said hoarsely. Especially you, Emily. I thought, if I pushed you hard enough, you'd become the person I wanted you to be. I blinked back tears. But I was already the person I was meant to be. You just couldn't see it. He nodded slowly, his gaze dropping. I see it now. Too late, maybe. But I see it. Sophie squeezed his hand, her tears falling freely. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely. But it was the beginning of understanding. Over the next few weeks, my father's health improved. He stepped back from the company, allowing Daniel to take on more responsibility. Meanwhile, Sophie and I grew closer than ever. One evening, as we sat on my balcony watching the sunset, Sophie said, Do you realize how far we've come? A year ago, you were sleeping on Jasmine's couch with nothing. Now we're both free. We have control over our lives. I smiled, my heart full. It feels like a miracle. Sophie tilted her head thoughtfully. Do you ever think about Grandma Rose? About what she would say if she could see us now? My throat tightened. Every day. I think she'd be proud that we honored her gift by building lives that are truly our own. That summer, I hosted a small dinner at my apartment. Jasmine was there. Of course, along with her roommates, my boyfriend Sophie, and a few close friends. We crowded around my tiny table, laughing, eating, and sharing stories. At one point, I glanced around the room and felt a wave of emotion wash over me. This was my family now, a chosen family built on love, trust, and mutual respect. The life I had once thought was over had transformed into something far better than I ever imagined. Later that night, after everyone had left, I sat alone by the window. Boston's skyline sparkled in the distance. I thought back to that awful night a year ago, when I had walked out of my parents' mansion with nothing but the clothes on my back and a heart full of pain. Back then, I had believed my life was ruined. But now, I understood the truth. Being cast out hadn't been the end. It had been the beginning. The beginning of freedom. The beginning of becoming my true self. I placed my grandmother's pearl necklace around my neck and whispered, Thank you, Grandma Rose. You saved me. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely at peace. Epilogue 1 year later, the following spring, I attended the graduation ceremony for the second Rose Carter Fellowship recipient. As I watched her walk across the stage, radiant with pride, I realized that my grandmother's legacy wasn't just alive, it was thriving. Sophie joined me afterward, hugging me tightly. Look at you, she said with a grin. Changing lives left and right. I laughed, brushing away a tear. We both are. In the distance, I saw my parents standing together. They waved cautiously, almost shyly. Sophie and I exchanged a look, then waved back. It wasn't a perfect family reunion, and maybe it never would be. But it was progress, and progress, I have learned, was enough. As the sun set over Boston that evening, I felt a deep, unshakable sense of gratitude for my independence, for my chosen family, for the courage it had taken to stand up for myself. My story hadn't gone the way I once imagined, but it had led me exactly where I was meant to be. And in that moment, I knew, no matter what came next, I would always be free.